All right, thanks. So our next talk will be Elaine Shi talking about, with a talk entitled "Synchronous with a Chance of Partition Tolerance."
Okay, so I'm going to talk about large-scale consensus and how these practical efforts have made us rethink the theoretical foundations behind distributed systems. This is joint work with Yu and Rafael. By the way, if you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt. I'm going to begin by just defining the problem we are trying to solve. It's called state machine replication, often called linearly ordered log or consensus. And in this talk, they all mean the same thing. In this picture, we have a set of Google Wallet nodes, and they're trying to agree on the linearly ordered log of transactions. And there are two security properties that we care about, namely consistency and liveness. So consistency says that all of these honest nodes must agree on the log, right? So some nodes may have faster network than others. So it could be like your log progresses a little faster than mine. That's okay, but at the end of the day, we have to agree. Liveness says that whenever I buy a coffee, this transaction should appear in all of the honest nodes logs very quickly, right? So it's not like I want to wait forever for my coffee. Now, if all of these nodes were honest and they correctly follow the protocol, the problem would have been trivial. But what's non-trivial, what's challenging about the problem is when some of these nodes can be compromised, like they have malware, and now these corrupt nodes, they can deviate arbitrarily from the protocol. And even under these adversarial conditions, we want to make sure the rest of the honest nodes can still satisfy these two security properties. So this is the problem that we are going to try to solve throughout the talk. Well, like if you are like me, like I got interested in consensus because of blockchains and cryptocurrencies, but in fact, consensus is a 30-year-old problem. There's been a long line of work on this. If you look at all these companies in the Bay Area, like everyone actually has been deploying consensus for the past decade or so to like make sure, you know, their computing infrastructure is replicated. And for example, Apache Zookeeper is like an open source implementation of a crash fault tolerant protocol that everyone basically uses. So in traditional deployments, right, we are looking at kind of the scenario I was talking about, a single organization like Google or Facebook, a small number of nodes, and these nodes are interconnected with fast local area network. But what's exciting about cryptocurrency is that they showed perhaps for the first time that consensus is actually possible on a large scale over the internet. And this is like much more challenging than the classical deployment scenario. And what differentiates, you know, this like small scale classical deployment and cryptocurrency, I think these are the three primary things that makes large scale consensus much more challenging. One is that, you know, the existing protocols, a lot of them are really unscalable. They're very, very slow. And that's a big pain point that's very much like often debated in the community. The second challenge is like, as I said, when we try to study large scale consensus, try to implement and deploy them in practice, we actually encountered problems with the underlying theoretical model. So we actually need to rethink, you know, what should be the right theoretical foundation for large-scale distributed consensus. And then the third difference, which is also very, very important, is like in the classical single organization scenario, like there is no incentive at all, right? These nodes are controlled by this single company like Google. But whereas in a decentralized setting, we need to incentivize nodes to participate. And not only so, like, you know, we want to make sure the incentive is for them to participate honestly and participate fast. So that's the incentive aspect. And in this talk, I won't have time to talk about the incentive aspect at all. Like I can give a separate talk, completely separate talk on this. I'm going to focus on the scalability and the mathematical modeling part. Okay. And so first, I want to talk about how to solve the scalability challenge. And then I will describe a protocol called Cinderella, which is what our company has implemented. And then I will use this protocol as an example to motivate why we need to like rethink the underlying theoretical model for consensus. So let me start with how to overcome the scalability challenge. Oh, just before that, this kind of illustrates how bad the scalability issues are, right? And this is a graph showing Ethereum transaction fees over time. So if you look at it, at the end of 2017, like there was a spike in the daily transaction fee, and that was because of this application called CryptoKitty. Like many of you may have heard of it. In comparison with like these social network games, like traditional games, social network games, mobile games, this is like really a toy application. But the surprising thing is like the single game alone, this very toy game alone, was able to basically overload the entire Ethereum platform. So with today's platform, like pretty much you cannot do anything interesting. So I will describe the Thunderella protocol, which is what our company has been implementing. I guess some of you may have heard about my talk elsewhere about this Thunderella protocol. If so, like just bear with me for a moment. Otherwise, maybe you should give me your undivided attention. Okay, we are working with this scenario. The guy in the center, I'm going to call him a proposer or leader, and there is a committee and the voters. I'm going to assume that the leader and the committee have already been elected, for example, through stake distribution. And some of these nodes can be corrupt. Like in this case, Loki is corrupt. Maybe the leader can be corrupt too. So I will describe a very, very simple protocol. And then we can think about what the simple protocol gives us, and then we can try to fix the problem together. So this very simple protocol is voting-based, very natural. Leader makes a proposal, and he proposes a block of transactions tagged with the sequence number. And the sequence number will determine in this very long lock where this block will land. For simplicity, in this talk, I'm just going to pretend we confirm one transaction at a time instead of one block at a time. Like a block is just a batching technique. And now when you hear a proposal, you're going to vote. And the vote is just a signature on the proposal. So if you are honest, you are going to vote for precisely the proposal you have heard. In this case, the leader proposed an orange transaction. So if you are honest, you vote for the orange. And remember, Loki is corrupt, so he didn't vote honestly. He voted for 2 blue transactions. So now after you vote, you just wait. And you wait until you hear 3/4 votes for the same transaction. And at this moment, you have sufficient confidence because many people have voted for the same, and then you are ready to confirm the transaction. So very natural. And then in the rest of the talk, I'm going to call a collection of 3/4 votes a notarization. And the most important thing about this protocol is that the honest nodes are going to vote uniquely at every sequence number, which means if you are honest, for each sequence number, you will wait until you hear the first proposal from the leader, and you vote for that proposal and only that proposal, nothing else. So with this important invariant in mind, I can give you an extremely simple consistency proof. And the proof goes as follows. In this scenario, both the blue transaction and the orange transaction, they have both gained a notarization. And we want to prove that the blue transaction is the same as the orange. And we can look at the set of blue people who have voted for the blue and the set of orange people who have voted for the orange. And the key observation is that the intersection of these two sets must be large. In fact, the intersection must contain at least half of the nodes. Now, assume that the adversary doesn't control more than half. The adversary controls only minority of the nodes. And this implies that inside this intersection, there must be an honest guy. And remember what I said about the honest guy, right? The honest guy is going to vote uniquely. So there is only one interpretation that the blue must be equal to the orange. So extremely simple consistency proof. And now we can kind of reflect on what this very simple protocol can give us. As I proved to you, we can achieve consistency under honest majority. As long as majority of the voters are honest, we can achieve consistency. And importantly, the consistency proof doesn't depend on the leader being honest. Like the only thing I used was the fact that honest nodes vote uniquely. Now, to achieve liveness, we need something stronger. We need that 3/4 of the people be honest and around to vote. And we also need that this leader is honest and online. Like if the leader crashes, then of course, nothing happens. If the leader proposes different transactions to different people, then everyone will vote inconsistently and nothing will gain a notarization. Right? And this is not very nice because liveness depends on the central guy. And what we want to be able to achieve is to achieve both consistency and liveness under this weaker set of conditions, under this yellow condition. And how can we do that? So Thunderella basically has a very simple idea to achieve this. I've talked about this voting protocol, and I'm going to call this the fast path. And imagine we already have an existing slow chain. Like you can think of it as Ethereum's slow chain, but it can also be a proof of stake slow chain. All we need is like a black box blockchain abstraction. And the slow chain achieves consistency and liveness under honest majority. So the idea is like whenever the fast path stops, you're just going to fall back to the slow chain. You can slowly reach consensus on the slow chain, but you can also use the slow chain to discuss how to fix the problem and how to rebootstrap the fast path, how to like re-elect leader and something. Okay. And this paradigm is nice in the following sense. It gives us performance because most of the time you are going to be operating on the fast path and you shouldn't have, you almost never see the slow chain performance. And it gives you the decentralization of the slow chain. So it has the best of both worlds. What I will do now is just quickly explain this, this fallback procedure I was talking about, like how to switch between fast and slow. And this is kind of important for understanding the latter part. Like, I'm going to try to use this to motivate why we need to rethink the mathematical model behind consensus. And the fallback mechanism is very simple too, and I only have to explain 2 things. One is that there must be a mechanism for nodes to detect that the fast path has failed. So once you detect it, you are going to invoke a second procedure called fallback. So I'll first talk about the detection mechanism. And here we are using a heartbeating mechanism. Every now and then, the nodes on the fast path, they will take a hash of the fast path log so far, and they are going to sign the hash. When the hash gains 3/4 votes, it becomes notarized, and we are going to call this notarized hash a heartbeat. And then you post these heartbeats to the slow chain. So now when things are good, you should see a new heartbeat every now and then. And the heartbeat basically serves 2 purposes. One is that it's a keep alive mechanism. And the second purpose is it gives a cryptographic checkpoint of the fast path log because the hash binds to a prefix of the fast path log. If at some point k blocks have gone by without a single heartbeat, then something must be wrong, right? For instance, maybe if the leader has crashed, then the fast path will stop. Or maybe the leader is malicious and he's trying to censor certain transactions and the committee refused to vote to rat the leader out. In either case, we want to fall back to the slow chain. And how do we do the fallback? Oh, by the way, k is the security parameter that's like needed for consistency. It's like for Bitcoin, it's like 6 blocks. So how do we do the fallback? It's also very simple. There's just like 1 Satoshi. Essentially, we already have consistency at every position, but what we don't have yet is consistency on the length of the fast path log. Like it could be Spider-Man's network is a little slower, so when he decides to fall back, he sees 3 transactions notarized on the fast path. But when Iron Man decides to fall back, he sees 6 transactions notarized on the fast path. So now these 2 guys have to use the slow chain to agree on what the length of the fast path log is during the fallback. And how do you do that? Very simple. If I see something notarized on the fast path, and I want this transaction to be picked up by the fallback mechanism, it is my responsibility to post it to the slow chain during the fallback. But you don't have to post everything since the very beginning. You only have to post these notarized transactions starting from the previous checkpoint. remember the heartbeat serves as a checkpointing mechanism. So as long as you make sure you post these notarized transactions to the slow chain during the fallback, it'll get picked up by the fallback, right? And after the fallback phase is over, you can continue to do consensus on the slow chain, or you can try to re-bootstrap the fast path from the slow chain. Okay, so that's just the protocol, very simple. And now that we combine this fast path and the slow chain, we can achieve stronger property. Namely, we can achieve both consistency and liveness under this weaker set of conditions. But under the stronger set of conditions, we are fast. Because under the stronger set of conditions, we just operate on the fast path. And in this orange regime, like essentially you almost never have to post any messages to the slow chain, right? The only thing you have to post to the slow chain are those heartbeat messages, which are very tiny. So that's why we get high performance. Okay. So just to quickly summarize the protocol, when things are good, you confirm transactions on the fast path through a single round of voting. When things are not so good, you fall back to the slow chain, and on the slow chain, you can discuss how to re-bootstrap the fast path. So that's the protocol, very simple. I guess I hope I've made it simple enough to understand, but the paper is actually much more painful to write because we had to write 74 pages of mathematical proof and modeling. Okay, so that's the protocol like we asked our engineers to implement. And now I'm going to try to use this as an example to motivate why we want to rethink the theoretical underpinnings of consensus. And by the way, do you have any questions at this point? Okay, so if not, okay, here's the more exciting part. I'm going to tell you, maybe I have lied to you. Like, that there is actually a flaw in the protocol that I've just described to you. Interesting, our engineers, when they implement this protocol, they pointed out this flaw. Actually, they had a couple of very nice observations when they were implementing the protocol. One is this flaw, which I will talk about in this talk. And another point they made is like this fallback is very, very slow. If you use Ethereum as the slow chain, right, the fallback will take a couple hours. We now know how to overcome both of these drawbacks. In this talk, I will talk about this interesting flaw. And this, like I'm contradicting myself right now, right? Because I told you there's 74 pages of mathematical proof, and yet there is this mysterious flaw. And in fact, in this flaw I'm going to describe, everyone is benign, like no one even has malicious intent. And yet, if just a few nodes crash in a specific timing pattern, confirmed transactions can get undone. So it seems like a pretty serious problem in practice. So how can you resolve this apparent paradox? Well, it turns out that the flaw is not with our proof, which is a relief. But the flaw is with the synchronous model with which people have studied consensus for the past 30 years. So this like 30-year-old model is actually not a best match for what you want to achieve in practice. So I'll talk about how to fix the model and how to fix the protocol. Okay. So basically the same example as before, except that think of one of the voters as Coinbase. So this is like, I'm going to describe how this flaw can happen. A leader makes a proposal, everyone votes. The leader will collect a notarization and send the notarization to Coinbase. At this very moment, notice that Coinbase is the only guy who has seen the notarization. Like no other voters have received the notarization yet. Okay. So of course, Coinbase believes that the transaction is confirmed. But at this precise instant, the leader crashes, like maybe the leader's network is being DDoSed. Okay, now Coinbase happily tells Ron that his transaction is confirmed, so Ron ships his Ferrari to Abby, and he waits. The Ferrari is gone. And now, the next thing that happens is that Coinbase crashes too. Like maybe Coinbase's network gets DDoSed too. Okay, so what's going to happen now, because the leader is out, right? The fast path will stop. Everyone's going to try to do this fallback. And they're all going to try to post notarized transactions they have seen to the slow chain. And because Coinbase is unaware that it has crashed, it's going to try to do the same. It will try to post Ron's transaction to the slow chain, but it's disconnected from the network, so the attempt fails. After some time, Coinbase comes back online, but it's already too late. Like the fallback is over, people have moved on, and this transaction is lost. It's undone, basically. So Ron will be sad face. Well, but the rest of the world has developed a longer log, and maybe if let's say you are malicious, you are the buyer, you could have double spent the transaction because the log has become longer when the Coinbase came back online. And Ron's transaction is not included in the stabilized part of the log. So even if he posts that later, it will be after this double spend. So he loses you get to double spend the coin. So how do we explain this? In this example, I'm assuming the accelerator is forwarding the notarization to Coinbase, but even if you have a peer-to-peer network, like the broadcast is not simultaneous, right? It still could be the case that Coinbase is the first guy who received it. Yeah, the first and only, because the network has delay. It's not like people receive it at the same time. Okay. Okay, so how do we resolve this paradox? And as I said, fortunately, the flaw is not with the proof. It's with the 30-year-old synchronous model, right?
No, but in this model, like the point is, everybody should receive that. Everybody would, not Coinbase would, and then everybody else would.
I don't understand the question. So Thunderella fundamentally is a synchronous protocol because the slow chain is synchronous. So like in our proof, we are making use of the fact. So let me explain it a little better, right? So in our proof, we are making use of the fact that when Coinbase receives the transaction, he believes that other people will receive it in delta amount of time. And that's a property of the synchronous network. Like it believes that if I receive it, I send it to everyone else will receive it in delta time.
So when the accelerator sends a message, the model in the synchronous means that within delta, everybody receives that.
Yes, but all of these, in the synchronous model, the property is like if an honest node sends a message, the message will be received by all of the other nodes in delta amount of time. And yet, if you crash, you are not honest anymore. Like the Coinbase could be trying to propagate this message to everyone else, but he crashes at this moment, so he's actually not honest, and this property doesn't hold in the synchronous model. So I'm actually going to explain this point a little bit more, and maybe hopefully it'll be more clear. So as we all know, in the synchronous model, when honest nodes send a message, the message is guaranteed to arrive in delta amount of time. And whatever the delay is, we can just call it one round, right? So we can imagine when an honest guy sends a message, everyone else will receive it at the beginning of the next round. In the example we saw, Coinbase dropped offline. Like even if the outage is temporary, he violated this assumption. So he is no longer honest. And a protocol that's provably secure in the classical synchronous model is not obligated to provide a security for Coinbase in this case because it's a faulty node. So now, that's why we had this paradox, right? Because even though Coinbase violated consistency with the rest of the world, like it's not a violation of the proof. So now you may tell me, okay, Elaine, you're not saying anything new here because that's exactly why we have the partially synchronous model, right? What's nice about the partially synchronous model is that message delay can be arbitrary. And for the purpose of this talk, partially synchronous and asynchronous mean the same. I don't have to distinguish them. And what's nice here is that if Coinbase crashes, that's just like a long network delay in the partially synchronous model, and Coinbase will not be treated as faulty. So when Coinbase comes back online, he's going to continue to enjoy consistency and liveness just as before. So at this moment, so by the way, for this reason, partially synchronous protocols are also said to be arbitrarily partition tolerant. So at this moment, we may think that partially synchronous is just a strictly better model. We should just completely abandon synchronous. But there is a catch, because we know that there is very well-known lower bound that in the partially synchronous model, we cannot hope to tolerate more than 1/3 corruption, whereas if you work with synchronous, you can tolerate up to minority corruption. And in fact, if you don't care about the round complexity of the protocol, in the synchronous model, we know how to tolerate arbitrarily many corruptions. So at this moment, we seem like now it's a dead end, because this is an inherent trade-off. You have to pick one form of unrobustness or another, right? Maybe we don't want to give up, and we want to ask, can we actually achieve the best of both worlds? Well, at first sight, and from all of the classical insights we have, that the answer should be no. But if you think about it a little deeper, like who says synchronous has to be a binary attribute? Like either the network is synchronous or not synchronous, and who says partition tolerance has to be a binary attribute? Like either the protocol is partition tolerant or not partition tolerant at all. So what we are going to try to do is to quantify exactly how synchronous the network is and how partition tolerant the protocol is. So that's the goal. And to do this, we would need a new model. To help understanding, I'm actually going to start with a very simple natural model, but it's kind of overly restrictive. So I'll explain this simple model first, and I'll explain why it's overly restrictive, and then how to relax this restriction. Imagine there is a set of nodes. These green guys, they're honest and online, and they're well connected. They can send messages to each other within one round. But there are some other honest nodes, like they're benign, they have good intent, but unfortunately, their T-Mobile service is not very stable. So like they can drop offline every now and then. And then there are these corrupt nodes, but we don't care about achieving any property for the corrupt nodes. We do care about achieving consensus for these green guys and the gray guys. So, I mean, of course, when the gray guys are offline, they cannot make progress, right? But what we want to say is when, like if the green guys, they drop offline, but as soon as they come back online, they should be able to make progress. And importantly, we want to make sure the green guys and the gray guys, they're consistent. So like in our earlier example, Coinbase would be one of these gray guys. So can we do this? Well, if you want to be able to achieve this, you have to make some assumptions, right? If the green guys, this set is less than a half, you can prove an impossibility result very easily, just because, you know, if you could do this, then two minority partitions can like independently reach consensus. You can formalize this intuition. I will not try to do it. But if the green set is more than majority, then in fact the answer is yes. We can indeed solve consensus for the green guys and the gray guys. I'll talk about how to fix the Thunderella protocol in this model. And we are going to call protocol secure in this model best possible partition tolerant. Because notice that in this model, we are making some kind of timing assumption, right? We are assuming there's a large set who have good network. But we acknowledge the fact that there can be other, gray nodes who are honest, but they may not have good narrow connection, and we don't want to penalize these the gray guys. Okay, so now I said this model is overly restrictive, and here's why. In my model so far, I'm assuming there's a set of green nodes who are persistently online throughout the protocol. And that's a very bad model, especially to study these blockchain protocols, because the Bitcoin has been running for 10 years, and no one can guarantee 100% uptime for 10 years. Like even Google has outage every now and then. So it could be that in the protocol, every honest node is at some point offline. So we can actually relax this restriction by adopting what I like to call the lazy co-author model. And here's a good way to think about it, right? Let's say the cryptographers in this room decide to write a paper together and send it to the next crypto. And cryptographers, sometimes they are lazy and they are not always online. Like on Monday, some people are available, other people go skiing. On Tuesday, some other set is available. Now, there may even be corrupt co-authors who are, trying to disrupt the project because the corrupt co-author is like secretly trying to write a competing paper. So now we want to make sure that, all these honest co-authors, they can finish the paper, make the deadline, and more importantly, at the end of the day, they have to prove the same theorem. It cannot be, okay, at the end of the day, we discover everyone has a different theorem in mind. So can we achieve this? As long as in every round, there's majority number of online nodes. And for modeling the network, we are assuming like whenever you are online, you send a message, then the online nodes in the future can receive it. If you are offline, there's no guarantee about the messages you send or the messages you receive. Okay, so I won't try to go into the details, but there's quite a bit of work in kind of formalizing this model. It's a very simple model, but we spend quite a bit of time trying to understand it. And next, I will describe how to fix the Thunderella protocol such that we can prove it to be best possible partition tolerant. The fix has two parts. I have to fix the fast path and the fallback, but I also have to fix the slow chain. In this talk, I'm going to focus on the fast path and the fallback. And at the very, very end of the talk, I can quickly mention about the slow chain if there's time. How many more minutes do I have? Okay, sure, yeah. The fast path fix is very, very simple. It's kind of like a one-liner. Previously, we believe the transaction is confirmed as soon as it gets notarized. But now I'm just going to ask you to be a little bit more patient. Not only does the present transaction has to be notarized, you want that the immediate next transaction is notarized too. And the reason is the following. Like if I see a transaction notarized, the only thing I'm sure of is many people have voted for the transaction. But if I now see the next transaction notarized too, imagine that honest nodes are only going to vote on the transaction when the parent is notarized. So now if the next transaction is notarized too, it means many people have seen the parent notarized. And this gives me more assurance because even if I happen to drop offline, like many people have seen the parent and they will, some of them will be online and they can post it to the slow chain, right? So the protocol would be, and take this notarized log, chop off the last notarized transaction and confirm all but one, basically. Confirm the prefix. You can formalize this intuition into a proof. I will not try to do that. I've kind of like skipped the more technically involved part in this talk, but in our paper, we actually try to understand the theoretical underpinnings of this new model. We show the feasibility of achieving Byzantine agreement to understand the cryptographic assumptions in this model. And we actually also extend our results to MPC. We show feasibility of MPC, and there the concern, like I said, is these people who drop offline, their secrets should not get leaked. We have a practical variant of the protocol. It's in a different paper. It's called Pili. If I have time at the end, I can spend 1 minute talking about Pili because it's an extremely simple protocol too. So I would like to conclude by making a couple of philosophical observations. The first observation is that the set of protocols that we care about, called best possible partition tolerant, is a strict subset of classical honest majority protocols. And what this is saying is that our model is a refinement of classical synchrony, and we allow you to tease out exactly which subset of classical synchronous protocols enjoy the robustness properties we care about in practice. And what's interesting is that, like, it's not like every classical honest majority protocol satisfy this robustness property, right? In fact, we looked at a bunch of these existing protocols that are known to be secure under classical synchrony, under honest majority, and none of them actually fall into this wide set. So, like, you know, if you are deploying, if you have a blockchain company, you want to deploy a synchronous consensus protocol, right? Not only, like, if you don't have a proof at all, like, you shouldn't be able to sleep, but if you have a proof and the proof is in the classical synchronous model, that's also not good enough in practice. Okay, now, what I have omitted so far is that under classical synchrony, there is a set of protocols that secures against corrupt majority, right? This is a very nice property, like we want to tolerate as many corruptions as possible. Unfortunately, we show that if you want to tolerate corrupt majority, you have to give up partition tolerance completely. The white set and the black set, they're disjoint. And one way to think about this is like the classical synchronous model is not a very good match for what we care about in practice. Because if you work with classical synchrony, you would be misled to think that tolerating more corruptions is always strictly better than tolerating fewer. But in practice, we always care about being in this white set rather than the black. Like, I hope I've convinced you with the example today that we always want to be in the white set. I guess this proof is saying if the protocol tolerates corrupt majority, it cannot be in that set. So if that's what you're asking, I guess the answer is no. That's a very interesting question. Well, it depends on what the sum guarantee is. Cannot be the standard consistency and liveness property. I'm basically done, but you can ask questions. Like, I'm supposed to say that we have launched 3 release version of our mainnet, and we can get to make our practice. The question is whether you can achieve, you can have a best of that both protocol that achieve something under the corrupt majority. That's not what So I guess, like, since I have a little bit of time, I can talk about this. This 1-minute consensus protocol, it solves a bunch of problems. Like, we can make it best possible partition tolerant. We can make the fallback faster. Like, I talked about this protocol, which has a pretty slow fallback. You can make it optimistically responsive. But okay, the basic protocol is the following. It's a synchronous protocol. So imagine the hour delivery is 1 second, and every effort gets 6 seconds. I added 2 estimates. Okay. In every effort, there is a unique proposer elected, and this proposer is going to propose a block. And everyone votes. The proposed block extends the threshold direction so far. Oh, sorry. And the proposed block extends the freshest notarized chain so far. And then the voters will vote on the proposed block if it satisfies a couple natural properties. Like, you want to make sure the parent of the block has already been notarized for the same reason I talked about earlier. And you also want to make sure the parent isn't too old. Like, the parent has to be have an epoch number that's like in the recent past. So by some definition of recent. Okay, now, whenever a block gains majority votes, it becomes notarized. So notarized doesn't mean final. And so what is final, right? Final means if at any point of time, if you see 6 notarized blocks at the end with consecutive epoch numbers, you're going to chop off the last 5. If you see 6 consecutive, and moreover, there are no conflicting notarizations at these epoch numbers, no conflict, and then you chop off 5, the prefix is considered final. So what's nice about this type of protocol is like basically like the latest, this is kind of the latest in consensus. Like we have, you may know PBFT, Paxos, like all of these protocols are pretty complicated because they have this fast path and they have a very complicated recovery path, like called view change, right? But we have shown essentially you can have a protocol that's just propose, vote, like boom, 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 confirm, 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 no special path at all for any recovery. Like everything is embedded in the single paradigm. So consensus should be like basically really, really simple. And this protocol, as I described it, is not best possible partition tolerant yet. Like you can make it best possible partition tolerant by checking conflict during the voting rather checking conflict at the finalization. So very simple modification. You can make it optimistically responsive by saying, whenever I receive 3/4 votes, I'm going to advance to the next epoch immediately without like waiting for the 3 seconds for the epoch to end. So it has all these nice properties. It can be a replacement for like Thunderella. So this protocol is called Pili. Pili means the sound of thunder in Chinese. Thank you.